Hello, this is cjhoyle. Today is Saturday, March 28th, 2020, and I'm standing here in front of the Rosedale Golf Club. Today I'm riding my 1992 Iowa Linear Recumbent Bike, which has an action camera mounted on the front of it. And in this video I'm going to be giving a narrated tour of Mount Pleasant Road, starting from up here in the Teddington Park neighborhood, all the way to downtown near Bloor Street. Alright, so from here I'll begin my way, heading down in the south direction. Mount Pleasant spans a little over 7 kilometers, and it's a lot of downhill, but a couple uphills along the way. It terminates back there near the golf course at Forest Glen Drive. But this part here is sort of the main part of Mount Pleasant, or not really the main part, but an early recognizable part where it's more of a well-established street. Further down it becomes a 2-lane road, or I guess a 4-lane road, two lanes in either direction. But right here it's mostly just a residential street, or in a residential neighborhood. And unfortunately they put stop signs almost every single block, which makes it not the most ideal for cycling. Those stop signs were put there to discourage people from driving quickly, sort of a traffic calming measure, but when you're on a bike, you're already going pretty slowly to begin with, so you're not really the concern. The traffic lights or the stop signs weren't put there with you in mind. This neighborhood is called Teddington Park, and it was developed around the 1930s. Before then it was farmland. And one of the streets I passed back there is actually called Teddington Park. I'm guessing it's sort of like the cornerstone of the neighborhood. It's a big sort of grand boulevard that has this median down the middle with sort of grass and trees, making it look more like a park, I suppose. But for the most part, this neighborhood is built in a grid, where all the streets are meeting each other at 90 degrees. This video is being filmed at 9:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and temperature's around 6 degrees Celsius. There's rain in the forecast this weekend, pretty high percentage of rain all weekend long. So when I woke up this morning and I saw that the rain had not yet started, and that the forecast seemed to predict that this morning was a lower likelihood of rain than the rest of the weekend, I decided to jump on this opportunity to get out and ride my bike and make this video. So Mount Pleasant Road curves a bit here, and I should mention Mount Pleasant Road is really a conglomeration of a bunch of different roads that were all sort of connected together and eventually ultimately renamed Mount Pleasant. We're just approaching Lawrence Avenue East, which unfortunately I just got a yellow light and a red light on, so I've got to stop here. And this, I say unfortunate because red lights are always unfortunate, I suppose, in a way, but this one is particularly more unfortunate than usual because this is a really long traffic light. So we'll be waiting here a while. But that's fine, it'll give me an opportunity to tell you about the surrounding area. So we're about to be crossing Lawrence Avenue, which is a major east-west arterial that spans, way out to the west end. It actually dead ends about a kilometer or so to the left of here. If we were to turn left heading in the east direction, it terminates there, but it then starts up again. There's kind of a big valley, well it's the Don Valley, that it doesn't continue across. There's no bridge there, so it stops and then it starts again. But as I was mentioning, Mount Pleasant is a conglomeration of a bunch of different streets that were all put together, and I believe the one that we were just riding on behind us used to be called Hilda Avenue. But the original part of Mount Pleasant was built much further south of here, and it was a road that was built to cross the Mount Pleasant Cemetery, which I'm sure I'll talk more about once we get down there. But because this road was not really an original part of the original grid that was set out here when, you know, this part of the province was developed, the road does curve a lot, and there's some of these jog intersections like this, which make it, you know, a little bit inconvenient for driving and for riding on, but not too bad as long as we're a little bit patient. As I said, this is a really long traffic light. We got to wait. It's kind of several different stages to be able to accommodate the traffic coming from all directions here. Oh, there we go. There's my green light, so I'll proceed. So I'll be briefly on Lawrence Avenue here, but I'll then immediately be making a left turn, and I'll be back on Mount Pleasant Road again. And we've got a little bit of a hill to climb. As I mentioned, a lot of the ride today is going to be downhill, but there are a couple of hills that you have to climb between here and my final destination. The reason it's mostly downhill is because Toronto slopes down to the south, because at the southern end of Toronto is Lake Ontario, which is a major water body that, you know, all the ground around here, when it rains, all the water that lands eventually will end up in Lake Ontario. But between here and there are a number of ravines with water bodies at the bottom of them that ultimately flow down into Lake Ontario. As we're riding through this part here, this part is considered Lawrence Park, the Lawrence Park neighborhood. As we're riding along here, take a close look at all the houses that are over on the left and see if you notice something a little bit unusual or out of place. I'm not going to point it out. Sometimes in my videos I'll put an arrow on the screen to show unusual things, but in this one I'm going to leave it as more of a Where's Waldo sort of a video. If you didn't see it already, you've missed it, so you might want to go back a little bit in the video. So we've got a stop sign here. Or not a stop sign, a red light. Even though there's nobody waiting to cross. I think this was another measure to slow traffic speeds down here, or possibly they just wanted to put this traffic light in here for kids to be able to cross for school. There might be some schools in this area. But we've now obviously crossed the crest of that hill I was talking about, and we're now heading down towards the bottom of one of those ravines, or we're not actually going to get all the way to the bottom, but we'll be crossing the ravine on this bridge up ahead. This traffic light is called Glen Road, and the pavement's pretty bumpy here, so please forgive the bumps of the camera. So the bridge we're crossing is over the Blythewood Ravine, which at the bottom of it has a stream, which is called the Burke Brook. And as I said, that's one of those ravines with water that flows down ultimately to Lake Ontario. That one eventually flows into the Don River, which eventually does make its way into Lake Ontario. And coming up the other side of that ravine, we've got another bit of a hill to climb here. For a time, I used to live relatively close to here, and I worked north. I live near Yonge Eglinton, and I used to work near Yonge and Shepherd, and my daily commute took me along that route, sort of along Yonge Street, but there's a number of different routes that I would take to ride back and forth to work. Of course, I have many videos that I posted back from that era that show my commutes, but occasionally I would take Mount Pleasant just as a change of scenery, but it really wasn't ideal because it's a relatively busy road, and also you have that hill back there that makes it a lot more work, and that hill is much less significant further to the west when you cross that architectural feature. So again, Mount Pleasant Road kind of curves a little bit here again. That traffic light there was Blythewood Road, which has the same name as the ravine, of course. So we're now approaching sort of the Yonge Eglinton neighbourhood, or I guess we're still a ways from there, but we're getting close. This road we're about to cross here is called Sherwood Avenue, and if you were to turn left there, that would take you to Sherwood Park, which is built on the edge of that same ravine that I just crossed, and it's a particularly interesting park. When I lived in the Yonge Eglinton neighbourhood, that was sort of my closest big-ish kind of park. So I would go there from time to time in the summer. I went tobogganing there in the winter sometimes. This road we're crossing is called Key Wotton, and the building that I lived in this area was on Erskine Avenue, which is the next traffic light, but the building property spanned all the way from Key Wotton to Erskine, so depending on whether you came out of the front of the building or the back of the building, you'd either be on Erskine or Key Wotton. So yeah, you can see we're now in a much more developed area, or a much more recently developed area. There's lots of much taller towers in this area. This is much more, well, I was going to say much more urban, but I mean, this is all pretty urban, I guess, but less suburban, I suppose. This traffic light here is for Broadway Avenue, which is a fairly common cycling route. When I used to live in this neighborhood, I would usually take Broadway for getting to an area that's, an area of Leaside that has a lot of big box stores like Canadian Tire, Home Depot, things like that. And Broadway was the route that I would commonly take. Over on the left, we're passing Northern Secondary School, which is a high school that was built back in 1930. It was originally called Northern Vocational School. Now that's not to be confused with North Toronto Collegiate Institute, or NTCI, which is another high school in this neighborhood that's located about 500 meters to the west of where I am right now. So two high schools that are relatively close together that have names that are kind of similar. Alright, so we're just about to cross Eglinton Avenue now. That's what this next traffic light is. And Eglinton Avenue is a major east-west street that currently is having a light rail transit, an LRT, built underground. The middle section of it's called the Eglinton Crosstown, and the middle section of it's buried, and the outer sections that go into the less densely populated areas, those areas are above ground and go right down the middle of Eglinton Avenue, or they will. We're still a few years away from that project being completed. And on that public transit way, there will be a stop right there at that intersection at Mount Pleasant and Eglinton. And we're now getting into sort of the businesses part of Mount Pleasant Road. This area is called Mount Pleasant Village. It has lots of restaurants and shops and stores and things. When I lived in this neighborhood, the place where I used to get my hair cut was along this strip. The barber has since retired, I believe. Now, to give you some context, I mean, as you're watching this video, you might be thinking, well, why are all these stores and things closed? Well, this video is being filmed in March, late March of 2020, which is during the period in history when we're all working together fighting the coronavirus, or the COVID-19. So the Mount Pleasant that you see today is very different from one that you'd see otherwise. I know that some people watch these videos when they first get posted, but lots of other people watch them after they're posted, so it's important to give some context there. So yeah, lots of businesses closed, but you know, there's a a list of essential businesses that are allowed to stay open, but otherwise everything else is supposed to be closed right now as we social distance ourselves and try to limit our interactions, which of course I'm very supportive of these actions, the best we can do. You know, we all have a role to play in this war here, and you know, the frontline workers, people working in the health industry and the service industry, servicing those essential services, but also those of us like myself who are not in that industry. And our mission in this is to do our best to follow what's been asked of us, and that's to limit our interactions as much as possible. In terms of getting outside, I do feel that bike riding is probably one of the better options, because during the course of a bike ride, you're very rarely, if never, you know, coming in contact with other people. Over on the right, we're just passing June Rowland's Park. June Rowland was the mayor of Toronto back in the 1990s, the early 90s. Toronto's first female mayor, who was later succeeded by Toronto's second female mayor. We're just crossing Davisville Avenue. Within June Rowland's Park, there's also the Sharon, Lois, and Graham playground, which is, for those of you that grew up with Sharon, Lois, and Graham on the Elephant Show, children's entertainers. It's a nice place to go for some nostalgia. So coming up ahead, we'll be crossing through the Mount Pleasant Cemetery, which is a very large cemetery. It's non-denominational. It was opened in 1876, and it's a full 200 acres, a full farmer's plot of land that spans all the way from Yonge Street to Bayview. And originally it was uninterrupted, but in the early 1900s, in an effort to improve traffic for cars as they were becoming more and more popular, Torontonians, or people who lived north of Toronto, I guess this area was not really part of Toronto at the time. People from sort of north of the city wanted to be able to get downtown easier, so a portion of the cemetery was expropriated to be able to build this road right down in the middle of it, and the road was named after the cemetery, which came long before it. Mount Pleasant Cemetery is home to many deceased prominent Torontonians. And now that we've finished crossing through the cemetery, we're now in a neighborhood that's known as Moore Park, which again originally wasn't part of the city of Toronto, but it was amalgamated at some point along the way. I should mention Mount Pleasant Cemetery is a particularly nice place to go. It's basically a park. I mean, it happens to have people buried there, but it's got lots of really nice and interesting exotic trees throughout there. It's very nicely landscaped, lots of interesting architecture, and it's open to the public, so you know you can just go and ride your bike around there. And for a lot of the people that live in that highly dense populated Midtown, Yonge and Eglinton, Yonge and Davisville area, that's a place where a lot of people will go and ride their bikes and go for a walk or go running. It really functions very much like a park. Alright, so we're just about to get to St. Clair Avenue East, which I'll be crossing. I am feeling a few raindrops. Maybe I'll stop here and just make sure that the camera doesn't have any raindrops on it before I go any further. Alright, thankfully no raindrops for now at least, but I can feel a few in the air, so if some get on the lens, please forgive me. I'll do my best to wipe them off when I can, but I can't see the front of the camera lens as I'm riding. So for a long time, Mount Pleasant Road would have dead-ended back there at St. Clair Avenue, but in the 1940s, there was an initiative to connect this road further down to the south. And this area here was built, which I imagine was a pretty big undertaking because it's, you know, a road that goes down into a ravine, and I'm sure they had to do a lot of digging to sort of flatten it out to make it feasible. But yeah, we're now heading down into a ravine which is called the Veil of Avoca, and just about to go underneath of the Canadian Pacific Rail line here. This is one of the most fun areas to ride a bike, I think. When I used to live in Midtown, going downtown on Mount Pleasant was a lot of fun. It's particularly nice today because there's really almost no other traffic, with roads being so much quieter than usual right now. At the bottom of this ravine, which as I said is called the Veil of Avoca, is a water body called the Yellow Creek, which also flows down into the Don River and eventually into Lake Ontario. We just passed Roxborough Avenue. And now, just like after I crossed the Blythewood ravine, I've now got the hill to climb to get back out of the Veil of Avoca. So yeah, when I lived in the Yonge Eglinton area and I wanted to get downtown, and I was going to somewhere that was sort of on the eastern side of Toronto, I would often take this route to get downtown. When I was going back uptown though, I didn't usually ride my bike right on Mount Pleasant. I find that hill is kind of annoying, and especially on a fairly busy road with cars that are going a lot faster than you. It's not really ideal for bikes, but there is a nice neighborhood route which goes through the neighborhood that's east of Mount Pleasant and eventually takes you up to Moore Avenue, up at the top of the hill. It goes through that Moore Park neighborhood, but also the neighborhood that we're passing through now, which is called Rosedale. And Rosedale is known for being a neighborhood with streets that all wind all over the place at funny different angles, and it's a real maze to get through. So having that signed cycling route through Rosedale is certainly appreciated, so people that don't ride the route every day aren't getting lost or having to look at their map or their phone or whatever along the way. Over on the left, we're passing the Rosedale Presbyterian Church, and straight ahead we're going to be going underneath of a skywalk for some buildings which are connected together across Mount Pleasant. Those buildings belong to Branksome Hall, which is a private school for girls. And while I get this red light, I might as well once again double check. So I imagine there probably are a couple raindrops in the front of the camera lens. And there are. That should be a bit better. So we're just about to cross Elm Avenue. And we're now very close to sort of the downtown core. This is a very common route for people to take who live in Midtown for getting downtown, people that work downtown. So if I were riding this route on a weekday morning heading in this direction, I probably would have a a lot more cars riding along beside me than I do today. We're now just going over another ravine. This is the Rosedale Valley ravine, or the Rosedale Valley, I guess it is, which at the bottom of it has Rosedale Valley Road, which a few weeks ago I made a video where I rode my bike down the Rosedale Valley Road, and you can see in that video I pointed out when I went across this bridge. I'm now going to go underneath something. This is Bloor Street that I'm riding underneath of. Bloor Street is an east-west street, and I'm not entirely sure why they decided to build the underpass so that those two roads didn't just, have a regular type of an intersection, but I guess Mount Pleasant really was designed more as a sort of an expressway to get downtown, and having to stop at Bloor would have slowed that down a little bit. This area here is surrounded by buildings which are operated by the Rogers Communication Company. And in fact, this road over on the right is called Ted Rogers Way. And after this intersection here, if we were to continue going in the south direction, Mount Pleasant Road changes and becomes Jarvis Street. Well, anyway, that concludes my narrated tour of Mount Pleasant Road here in Toronto. If you watched all the way to the end of the video, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.